Great. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm speaking on behalf of my co-authors, Joao and Paulo, who's joining us from a iffy internet connection in Sao Paulo, and Katiuscia, who could not be here. And we have a fourth collaborator in our co-edited volume in progress, Nico Bilica in Vienna, unfortunately not joining us. What I'm presenting is our first shot at our concluding reflections for a co-editor's concluding chapter of a project that we've been involved in for the last couple of years with a day and a half workshop in New York and a couple of panels at Lyra and Ilera conferences. And so our point of departure is this idea of global Amazon, taking into account Amazon's expanding global footprint as a multinational, with some 30% of its global square footage outside the US and some 46% of overall facilities outside the United States, something that the research hasn't yet caught up to. And so now in 21 countries across, depending on what you consider a continent, there are warehouses or fulfillment centers and in-country platforms in 21 other countries outside the United States. And you can see here the tremendous growth of the course of 11 years covered by this particular slide in non-US fulfillment centers. And in blue and purple, you see highlighted developing countries, which is a new area of expansion for Amazon in the global South in the past decade or so. And here on a map, updated as of 2023, you see where Amazon is present in the sense of there are more countries where Amazon Web Services is present. These are countries where there are e-commerce platforms and in-country distribution facilities. The only addition to this map would be, as of this year, South Africa, and the first on sub-Saharan African continent. So the previous literature, understandably, focused on this notion of Amazon capitalism, developed in the wonderful Cost of Free Shipping volume, and mostly reflected research that had taken place through the eve of the pandemic or early into the pandemic, and in the United States and Western Europe. Our volume expands this geographically, as well as to different levels of development by bringing in empirical work on US, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, UK, Germany, Poland, Turkey, India, and South Africa. Now, the meta questions for our collective inquiry are: how well does Amazon capitalism, so to speak, travel? How much does it change as it travels? And does the company, like some multinationals, mechanically transfer or diffuse its home country model, or is it forced to, or does it proactively adapt and adjust to distinct socioeconomic and institutional configurations as it moves around the globe? What we want to share with you are 5 concluding themes that we have from the volume that we're trying to flesh out. And a first has to do with the difficult conditions for organizing and collective action. The low wages and high stress, high turnover, occupational safety and health challenges, absence of career ladders, intrusive algorithmic surveillance of work and workers. These are all common findings across this range of countries and regions, coming from the mostly qualitative studies based on ethnography, in some cases participant observation of our contributors, and qualitative research in general, but they also dovetail with Uni Commission surveys covering 8 mostly northern countries in 2022, as well as a 2024 survey in India of Amazon workers, in that case, both delivery as well as warehouse. There are also the additional challenges of the nature of the workforce: precarious, young, gendered, workforce of color, often internal migrants or immigrants in these high stress, high turnover jobs. And added to that is the remote physical locations outside of major urban centers, but close to them, in gated locations and in facilities that are internally quite large, without easy access, no access, in fact, to workplace gates for organizers or for opportunities for sociability outside of those gates, and few opportunities for internal sociability because of the nature of the work schedule and the sprawling nature of these facilities. So despite the fact that we might expect these factory-like concentrations of workers in the case of fulfillment centers in the hundreds to thousands to give propitious conditions for cultivating structural power resources, this is in fact not the case because of this set of circumstances. However, moving to a second theme, we find that workers are differentially positioned depending on Amazon's particular mix of coercion and consent generating mechanisms and where they sit in the labor market. This is something that flows across the various chapters, empirical chapters, comparative and single country, particularly developed by Mustafa Henaway in his chapter in Quebec. I don't know if Mustafa is here, but a shout out to him if he is. But it also resonates with the findings of US Amazon worker mixed methods research in warehouses by Vallis and Company in a couple of publications. Some practices that are relevant here are paying slightly above market wages for comparable precarious jobs, internal competitions in the form of prizes awarded in company scrip based on internal competition among workers to achieve productivity and quality goals, and in some cases, in some places, educational benefits. Also, the use of different variations on an internal status differentiation system, typically reflected in the color of people's badges, which entails certain kinds of hierarchy and privileges among a workforce that's generally speaking horizontally broad-banded without an elaborate job and classification system or career ladders. Third, we find that if you look across continents, countries, the company shows a remarkable ability to resist large-scale organizing and meaningful and encompassing collective bargaining where there are unions. In the case of coordinated market economies with societally corporatist institutions, there are challenges of coordination of collective action beyond the workplace level. The company has been able to resist or boycott national bargaining, national employer associations, and play with the fact that e-commerce, it's not clear where it fits among existing categories based on transport, logistics, and commerce. And in more voluntaristic IR, ER systems in liberal market Anglophone countries, we know very well the obstacles to formation, the Wagner Act kind of obstacles. As examples, we find only islands of formal organizing there, but I'm pleased to speak to you from the home city of the first Amazon union in North America. It only took 27 years in the country to get the first union, and projecting to you in the home of the Laval Union, the second union in all of North America, and the first since Amazon opened its first warehouse, I believe, in 2012 in Canada. Not surprisingly, in Quebec with its distinct labor laws. In hybrid systems with heavy state corporatist residue, where Joao Paulo, Kat, and I have done fieldwork in Mexico and Brazil, representation is still quite pro forma. There are remnants of protection contracts in Mexico, despite recent labor reforms and new mechanisms for labor right dispute pursuit within the USMCA. And Brazil's collective bargaining is very formalistic. At the municipal level across workplaces, there's not an organic workplace presence of unions. Fourth, where there are countervailing or constraining forces affecting Amazon's unilateral model, they reflect locationally specific configurations of agency and institutional evolution. Laws and regulations governing subcontracting and agency work do vary cross-nationally, and that is consequential. For example, in Mexico, they were forced to insource from agencies after there was an adoption of a progressive law regulating subcontracting in a progressive way. And by contrast, in Brazil, Amazon workers in fulfillment centers are hired under agency contracts for 9 months. That only then are they considered for direct hire, and that's not automatic, and sometimes those are extended through agencies because of flexible law norms in the last, since the 2017 flexible labor law reform. Also varying across countries are regulations or laws governing app-based and platform work. Recent rulings by the NLRB that seem to maybe facilitate joint employer liability status. The EU Platform Workers Directive that's still going to be played out in terms of its impacts. Discussions about this issue in both Mexico and Brazil, but nothing concrete as far as national regulation or any employment-like status for delivery workers of parcels or food. There are for some transport-based apps in Brazil now. And spreading across US states, we have Warehouse Worker Protection Acts on algorithmic transparency, work quotas, and occupational safety and health impacts, now in 5 different states, starting with the 2021 California law. We still don't know their impact. It's a ripe area for future research. We also have loose-knit alliances of non-union workplace activists in India and in the US with Amazonians United. We have both Amazon Workers International as well as the cross-civil society Make Amazon Pay network. Some national unions have belatedly rushed in where there has been grassroots organization, in some cases wildcat actions, like in the UK, or we could argue with Teamsters and RWDSU stepping in the US. What we find in Sao Paulo is that a centrist union that's the leading union in a national confederation has stepped in to try to help a local union organize workers in the warehouse corridor north of Sao Paulo with active assistance by global union hired organizers on the ground. Also, whether or not international actors or transnational networks are come into play in individual settings is consequential. In terms of global union federations, in terms of international departments of northern unions, thus far, the AFL-CIO or the Teamsters are internally focused, and no one's seen a presence of their action in places like Mexico, where recent labor reforms would create an opportunity to organize Amazon workers there. There's a vacuum of legal representation right now. Amazon resisted for years forming a European Works Council, despite the fact that it would be legally obliged to, and only did so after 4 years of negotiations that were very protracted and with severe restrictions on the terms of bargaining or the terms of consultation. Finally, our 5th and final theme, emerging fronts in the struggles to contain Amazon. What we see and what we have done some empirical research on in the greater New York context is union and alt-labor alliances with environmentalists and community-based organizations around issues of an Amazon air hub that they wanted to build or take over at Newark Airport, which was successfully resisted, or around efforts to create a regulatory and licensing structure for new warehouse facilities of various types and sizes at both the New York State level and the New York City level, which has gotten some traction but has not fully come to fruition. We're also looking around the country. We find in the United States cancellation or denial of permits or moratoria on new warehouses. And there are some 1,300 fulfillment centers in the United States. Also, Amazon is having trouble getting access to the land for its data centers. and supposedly it needs some 400 new data centers by 2040. And just this week, a company document was leaked that complained of problems with labor, water, environmental, and other problems that were preventing Amazon's expansion. And that's not just a matter of, in conclusion, AI per se, but the Amazon Web Services plays an important role in creating and managing the algorithms for the whole distribution network. So those are some of the broad themes still incipiently developed of this volume that's still very much in progress, but that we wanted to share with all of you. And we look forward to going into further detail in the Q&A. Thank you.